said, "Sign it or lose the house." My brother shoved the papers across the table hard enough that my coffee mug hit the floor. It shattered. Nobody moved to clean it up. That was the moment I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Before I tell you how I walked out of that room and spent the next 4 days turning my family's lives inside out, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you sacrificed for family that you never got back? I read every single one. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in front of them in 11 years, and I wasn't about to start. I picked up my bag, stepped over the broken mug, and left. My name is Leigh. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a compliance auditor for a regional bank. My entire job is finding the thing people tried to hide, the number that doesn't add up, the signature that came from the wrong hand. I'm good at it. I've always been good at it. I've just never thought I'd have to do it at my mother's kitchen table. Let me back up. My father passed away 14 months ago. Quietly, the way he did everything. A massive stroke on a Tuesday morning, gone by Thursday afternoon. He was 61. He had a will. He had a financial planner. He had, apparently, a whole second set of instructions that nobody bothered to tell me about until he wasn't around to explain himself. My brother is 4 years older than me. He's the kind of man who wears confidence like a costume, loud in rooms, quiet on receipts. He works in commercial real estate, or he says he does. What he actually does is find investors, collect fees, and move on before the deal fully closes. He's been doing it for years. My father called it entrepreneurial. My mother calls it ambitious. I call it what it is. When the estate attorney read the will 3 weeks after the funeral, everything seemed straightforward. The house, paid off, worth around $480,000 in the current market, was to be split equally between the two of us. My father's retirement account, a modest $112,000 after taxes, would go to my mother for living expenses. There was a small savings account, some personal property. Clean. Simple. My brother shook the attorney's hand, smiled, drove my mother home, and started making phone calls. I found out 2 months later, entirely by accident. I was helping my mother sort through paperwork. She gets overwhelmed. She always has. And after my father died, she let mail stack up in piles on the kitchen counter. I was organizing, not snooping, and I found a document that shouldn't have existed. It was a transfer of beneficial interest. Dated 6 weeks after my father's death, it listed my name as a co-transfer. My signature was at the bottom. I had never seen that document before in my life. I set it down very carefully. I finished sorting the mail. I hugged my mother, drove home, and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to go inside. The signature was good. I'll give him that. It wasn't a sloppy copy. He'd clearly practiced or paid someone who had, but there were 2 things wrong with it that I spotted immediately because this is literally my job. First, the ink pressure was wrong. Heavier on the downstrokes in a way mine never is. Second, the date format. I always write the month in letters, never numbers. The signature on that document had the date written as 03/14. I have never written the date that way in my adult life. Someone had forged my signature to transfer my share of the beneficial interest in my father's house to a limited liability company. I looked up the LLC. It was registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a corporate services company, the kind you use when you don't want your name attached to something. But the operating agreement, which I pulled through a contact I have at a title research firm, listed a single member. My brother. He had forged my signature to steal my half of my father's house and put it in his own shell company. I want to tell you that I was shocked. I want to tell you I couldn't believe it. But the honest truth is that something in my chest just went very still and very cold. The way it does at work when I'm looking at a spreadsheet and I find the number that explains all the other numbers. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. This is who he is. I had just never been the target before. I didn't call him. I didn't call my mother. I went to bed, slept 6 hours, the best sleep I'd had since the funeral, actually, and woke up at 5 in the morning with a plan. The first thing I needed to know was whether the transfer had already been acted on. If the house had been sold or refinanced using that document, I was in a different situation than if it was still pending. I called my contact at the title firm when they opened. She pulled the county recorder records. The transfer had been filed and recorded. And this was the thing that saved me. The house itself had not yet been sold. There was an active listing on it, 4 days old. He was trying to sell it fast. Whatever deal he had lined up, he needed to close it before anyone noticed. I had maybe 2 weeks. Possibly less. I called the real estate attorney that same morning. Not a family friend, not someone local, someone 3 counties over who had no relationship with anyone involved. I explained what I had. She asked me to email the documents immediately. Within 2 hours, she called me back. "This is deed fraud," she said. "This is a felony." I know, I told her. I need to stop the sale. She filed for an emergency lis pendens that afternoon, a legal notice attached to the property title that tells any buyer and any title company that there's a dispute in litigation. The moment that notice hit the public record, his sale was dead. No title company in the state would insure a transaction on a property under a fraud claim. I didn't tell him. I waited. He called me 4 days later. He was calm at first, almost friendly. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about the house. I'm thinking about liquidating it to cover some of Dad's outstanding debts." Dad didn't have outstanding debts. I'd seen the estate documents. His accounts were clean. I said, "Okay, what debts?" He stumbled just slightly. "Some business things. It's complicated. It would actually help Mom too. The maintenance costs are getting to be a lot for her." My mother had never mentioned maintenance costs to me. I'd been to her house every other Sunday. She'd been talking about planting tomatoes in the back garden. "That sounds serious," I said. "Send me the documentation on the debts and I'll review it." There was a pause. "It's not really that kind of thing, Leigh. It's a family decision." "I'm family," I said. "Send me the documents." He didn't send them. Instead, 3 days later, he called my mother. I know this because she called me afterward, confused and a little distressed. He had told her that I was being difficult about the estate, that I was holding things up, that if I didn't cooperate, she might lose access to some of the assets my father had left. She didn't fully understand what he was saying. She rarely does when it comes to financial things. But she was worried. I drove to her house that Sunday. I sat down at her kitchen table and I showed her everything. The transfer document with my forged signature, the LLC registration, the lis pendens filing. I walked her through it slowly, the way I'd walk a client through findings. I didn't editorialize. I just showed her the numbers. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you had agreed to this. He said it was a tax strategy." I looked at her. "Mom, that's my signature. He forged it." She looked at the document for another long moment. Then she said, "He was under a lot of pressure." I understood then what I was dealing with on all fronts. My mother isn't a villain. I want to be fair about that. She is a woman who spent 40 years making herself smaller so that the men in her family could feel larger, and now she didn't know how to stop. She wasn't going to help me. She wasn't going to confront him. She was going to sit in the middle and hope the problem resolved itself, the way she had always done, and she would call it keeping the peace. Her silence wasn't neutral. It never is, but it was hers, and I couldn't change it. What I could do was build the case without her. My attorney filed a formal fraud complaint with the county DA's office the following Monday. The deed fraud statute in our state is a Class C felony up to 5 years. The forged signature on a property transfer instrument is the kind of thing prosecutors actually like because the evidence is physical and the paper trail is clean. There's no he said, she said. There's a document with a signature that isn't mine, filed with a public recorder's office, used to transfer a $480,000 asset into a company my brother owned. It's almost elegant, in a grim way. What I didn't know yet was how much further it went. The DA's investigator, a quiet woman named, I'll just call her the investigator, she asked me not to use her name. She pulled the LLC's bank records as part of the discovery process. What she found there was not just my father's house. There were 2 other properties. One was a condo that had belonged to my paternal grandmother who passed 4 years ago. My brother had handled the estate at the time. The other was a rental property that had been jointly owned by my father and his business partner from 30 years ago. The partner had died. My father had inherited the full interest, and it was supposed to pass through the estate to me and my brother equally. Both properties had been transferred into different LLCs. Same structure, different names, using documents with forged signatures. In my grandmother's case, the signature was my father's, forged after his death. In the rental property case, the signature was mine again. He had been doing this for years. My father's death had just given him more material to work with. The total value of the assets he had misappropriated came to just under $800,000. By the time the investigator had finished pulling the thread, the charge sheet had grown considerably. Deed fraud, forgery, identity theft. Wire fraud, because some of the transfers had been executed electronically. Estate fraud. The district attorney added a conspiracy charge when they discovered he had used a notary, someone he apparently paid to stamp the forged documents as verified. The notary lost her certification and faced her own charges. I want to mention that because I think it matters. He didn't do this alone. He paid people to help him, and those people made choices. The week before the DA's office moved, he called me again. I was expecting it. My attorney had told me it was possible he'd heard something was coming through the legal grapevine. He had his own attorney by this point, a civil litigator who I suspect was starting to realize his client had a much larger problem than a family real estate dispute. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't even pretend to. He called to negotiate. "Look," he said, and his voice had that particular flatness that means someone has rehearsed what they're about to say. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand. I think if we sit down, just the two of us, we can find a way to resolve this that works for everyone. I can make you whole. We can keep this in the family." Keep this in the family. "I appreciate you calling," I said. "I should let you know that I'm recording this conversation and my attorney will be receiving a copy." He hung up. 5 days later, he and the notary were both served. My brother called my mother from outside the courthouse. She called me 20 minutes later, crying. He had been processed and released on bond. He was saying I had destroyed the family. He was saying my father would be ashamed of me. He was saying a lot of things. I listened to all of it. I let her say everything she needed to say. When she was quiet, I asked her one question. "Mom, did you know?" A long silence. "I didn't ask," she said finally. "I didn't want to know." That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 14 months. I didn't tell her that I understood. I didn't tell her that I understood. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't. But I didn't say any of that. I just told her I loved her and that I would come for dinner on Sunday, and I hung up. Here's the part people don't tell you about doing the right thing in a family situation. It doesn't feel triumphant. It doesn't feel like justice, not right away. It feels like standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed and noticing for the first time how strange the walls look without anything to cover them. The civil case is ongoing. My attorney has filed to have all 3 property transfers voided, and the court has issued an injunction preventing any further disposition of the assets while the fraud case proceeds. The house is no longer listed. The LLCs have been frozen. His real estate business, whatever it actually was, has effectively collapsed because the 2 investors he brought in for a development project pulled out the moment his arrest made the local business news. My mother is still in her house. I go on Sundays. We don't talk about him. We talk about the tomatoes she planted, which are doing well. She shows me pictures of them on her phone. I look at the pictures. I eat whatever she's made. I help her sort the mail. She knows I reported her son to the district attorney. She knows because I told her clearly, before it happened, I wasn't going to let her find out from a phone call on a courthouse steps. Whatever else I am, I'm not someone who does things behind people's backs. He goes to arraignment next month. I'll be there. Not to watch him suffer. I genuinely don't need that. I'll be there because I'm the complaining witness in the case, and because my attorney advised it, and because showing up is what I do. It's what I've always done. I used to think loyalty meant staying. Staying quiet, staying small, staying in the family story even when the story was a lie. I thought love looked like absorbing the cost of other people's choices without complaint. I know better now. The cost of staying silent was $800,000. And my father's entire legacy. The cost of speaking was 1 phone call to an attorney, 4 days of paperwork, and every family dinner feeling slightly different from now on. That trade was not close. If you've ever been told that protecting yourself is the same as betraying your family, drop the word clear in the comments. And share this if you believe that the truth doesn't need your permission to come out. I've thought a lot about the moment my brother shoved those papers across the table. Not because it still hurts. It doesn't, not the way it used to, but because of what I did next. I picked up my bag and left. No screaming, no threats, just left. And I think that decision, that one quiet choice, is what made everything else possible. People talk about karma like it's something that arrives from outside, like the universe is keeping score and eventually sends a bill. I don't think about it that way. What I've come to believe, after everything that happened with my family, is simpler and a little harder to sit with. The consequences were always already built into the choices. My brother didn't lose his business, his investors, and his freedom because something came for him from the outside. He lost them because of a long chain of decisions he made over years, each one a little worse than the last, each one requiring the next one to cover it. By the time I found that forged document in my mother's mail pile, the structure was already collapsing from the inside. I just stopped holding up my corner of it. That's what I keep coming back to. For years, I was a load-bearing wall in a house built on dishonesty. Not because I was dishonest, I wasn't, but because I stayed quiet. Because I told myself it wasn't my place to look too closely. Because watching my father call my brother's behavior entrepreneurial made me think maybe I was the one reading it wrong. It took seeing my own forged signature on a legal document to make me understand that my silence had a cost, and that cost had been paid in installments for a very long time. The hardest part wasn't reporting him. The hardest part was my mother saying I didn't want to know, because I understood exactly what she meant. Not knowing is easier. Not knowing means you don't have to make a choice. She had made that calculation over and over for decades, and I had watched her do it and called it keeping the peace and thought that was something to respect. It isn't. It's just a different kind of decision with its own consequences. I'm not angry at her. I go on Sundays. We talk about the tomatoes, but I think about what it cost her too. Not legally, not financially, but in terms of who she had to become to sustain that not knowing. What you agree to look away from shapes you. It always does. What I know now is that integrity isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the thing you do when you find the forged document. You pick it up carefully, you finish sorting the mail, you drive home, and then you make the call. Not because you're brave, because you know your own signature. Because you know your own signature. Because you understand, finally, that protecting what is true is not the same as being cruel, no matter what anyone in that family tells you. My brother made his choices. They compounded. The math caught up. I made mine, and I can sleep.